Good morning to you. Good morning. Happy Independence Day. What a blessing it is to be here and be in this country. This morning we celebrate the 245th Independence Day. 245 years since the framing and adoption of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to spend a little time historically. And then we're going to spend a little time talking about that flag and the allegiance that we just shared in the pledge. And then, as you know, we're going to spend some time in the scriptures entitled, When the Bough Breaks. Okay? And you'll hopefully see what that means here in a few moments. Okay? The history of independence dates back to the 18th century and the American Revolution, which spanned 8 years. In June of 1776, representatives of the 13 colonies, then fighting in the revolutionary struggle, they weighed a resolution, or they put together a resolution that would declare independence of the United States from Great Britain. On July 2nd, the legal separation of the 13 colonies from Great Britain occurred when the Second Continental Congress voted to approve the resolution of independence that had been proposed by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia. 2 days later, its delegates adopted, I should say, the Declaration of Independence, a historic document drafted by Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Ben Franklin. 13 colonies, so we'd say 13 states. And they were in agreement. They were in harmony. And so we're going to talk about that. The Declaration states, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute no new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. We have a copy of that in the back, and we hold that. You say, oh, Pastor, that's too political in church. Hey, it gets better. John Witherspoon, member of Congress, signed the Declaration of Independence. He was president of Princeton University. At that time, they trained over 70 of our founding fathers of our country, how we came about. Witherspoon said, "He is the best friend to American liberty who is the most sincere and active in promoting true and undefiled religion, who sets himself with great firmness to bear down on profanity and immorality of every kind." He went on and said, "Whoever is an avowed enemy of God, I would not hesitate to call him an enemy to his country." Robert Winthrop, Speaker of the House of Representatives, in 1852 said, and this is one of his most famous quotes, you've maybe heard this before, "Men, in a word, must necessarily be controlled, either by a power within them or a power without them, either by the word of God or by the strong arm of man. either by the Bible or the bayonet. It is a declaration of independence from the tyranny of man. At the same time, it is a declaration of dependence on God. So the citizens established a pledge to remember these things. You're going to see that. To remember these things. You just recited the Pledge of Allegiance. And I want it there so that you have it here. Not here in your brain, here in your heart, your attitude, and your actions, because it's easy to forget it, as you'll see in a moment. This flag, that flag, was born 1776. Credit given to Betsy Ross. 245 years ago? Wow. The earliest pledge to the flag was created in 1887 by a Captain Balch. He says, this is how it started. We give our heads and hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag. In 1892, a minister named Bellamy, he put in the pledge, I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A lawyer named Baughman from Illinois, he was the first one to suggest that we put under God into the pledge, and that came from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which is an amazing document. You should read that if you have not. Eisenhower, in 1954, February 8th, took a bill that was going through the Senate at the time from a Republican named Oakman, and Congress passed the necessary legislation. Eisenhower signed the bill into law on Flag Day, June 14th, 1954. 67 years ago. And so, here's what Eisenhower said. He was a president of the United States. Now listen, from this day forward, the millions of our school children will daily proclaim in every city and town and every village and rural schoolhouse the dedication of our nation and our people to the Almighty. In this way, we are reaffirming the transcendence of religious faith in America's heritage and future. In this way, we shall constantly strengthen those spiritual weapons which forever will be our country's most powerful resource in peace or in war. 67 years later, wouldn't he be saddened by much of what he sees? I am delighted to know that this Pledge of Allegiance is recited daily in our schools. Okay? Daily. And it should be around the world. Now, that's not true in every state, but it should be. The pledge, when you say, I pledge, that's you. It's not the people beside of you, that's you. It's to make a solemn promise or undertaking. Allegiance means loyalty or commitment. Loyalty. Commitment. One nation. Isn't that an interesting comment? One nation. Means unified. One. Indivisible. That it cannot be divided. That one nation is solid. It's not a mixture of things all separate. It's solid. It's unified. And today, we are the most disunified nation in the world, in my opinion. Okay? In our own opinions. Divisiveness runs rampant. One nation, undivided. People are divided because of their own wills. Normally because of ego and pride. It says under God. A follower of Christ, it means, and His Word. It means someone who yields to the sovereign will and purpose of the Creator God. I pledge, I give a promise that I will undertake with all my commitment and loyalty to be undivided as follower of Christ and who is at liberty, which means as a citizen or is not a slave, in justice, to do what's right. When we stopped reciting that, we lost that flavor. Then people were able to say, hey, you can't say that in church. Wow. Separation of church and state. As you've just heard, and there's much, much more to this, there is no separation of church and state from the time we began Independence Day to today. Every single document points to the fact that we are totally dependent on God to run our government, and without Him, we will see the bow breaks. If I might paraphrase the Pledge of Allegiance this way, why people don't want this, why they all, I'll take part of that, but I'll take that part out, or I'll take that part out. See? Many do not want to promise or undertake a loyal commitment to being unified in such a way as to be undivided, with a sense of freedom, doing that which is right in accordance with the will and purpose of Almighty God. I'll say that again. Many do not want to promise or undertake a loyal commitment to being unified in such a way as to be undivided with a sense of freedom, doing that which is right in accordance with the will and purpose of Almighty God. That's the person who says we should get rid of this. Because they're not going to be loyal or committed. They're going to be divisive. And they could care less about God. By my count, in my family, Taylor's not here, okay? We are 9 generations away from that day, this day. 9 generations. Judges chapter 2 says, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which He had done for Israel. How many generations does it take to forget God? We don't know how many it took, but there arose another generation. So if I might say, 9 generations from the founding of the Declaration of Independence, from the formation of a Pledge of Allegiance to a flag of our country, 9 generations, it has occurred to dissolve all of that and to tear down anything that actually portrays any of this. And I'm going to suggest that's a problem. It's a problem with God. You see, the Creator God of the universe has always dealt with every single nation that has turned from Him. But the good side, He has always dealt with every single nation that has turned toward Him. And I would take the principle and just move it right on down the list to people, to individuals. We're going to see in a moment God deals with Israel, God deals with Babylon, God deals with all of the nations. You remember Jacob in the Bible? He becomes Israel. God ordains it so that he and his descendants, those generations, would then become the chosen people of God. He makes a promise, God does, they will never be destroyed. They are, in fact, the property of God. They are indeed the nation of God. And within that nation of Israel, there has always been a remnant. It means somebody left. Now in Genesis 49, Jacob gathers his sons to bless them. And you should read that chapter. It's an interesting chapter. We talked this morning in the study about names and what they meant, and then how that person, Boaz, and they create Obed, and Obed is then the father of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. That means something. That is prophetic. They didn't just say, hey, let's make David. Well, we got to make these other kids first. See, they don't do that. And that would be like asking you, did you plan for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren? You might have planned for your children. By the way, if you didn't plan for your children, God did. Isn't that amazing? Some people get surprised. God's working in your life. You go, God's always working in our lives. Genesis 49:22, you don't have to turn there. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. Its branches run over a wall. Joseph, descendant of Jacob. Jacob has already bestowed in chapter 48 of Genesis his great blessings on the sons of Joseph. Sons of Joseph. Then in chapter 49, he goes to Joseph himself and the other boys. Joseph is mentioned throughout the Bible. There's not a word of condemnation against Joseph. He is a man blessed by God. It says in the Bible that God is with him. He is the only tribe mentioned in the Hebrews 11, as a faithful man. And it says this, by faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of his sons of Joseph, worshipped and leaning on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel, and gave orders concerning his bones. Israel proves over and over and over that it is unfaithful to the design and purpose of God. They follow the teachings and pagan practices of the nations and cultures around them. But with God, for them, Israel, there is forgiveness. Turn in your Bible to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 27 is where we're headed this morning. You say, that was a pretty lengthy introduction, Pastor. And you'd be right. Isaiah 27. You know, there are a few chapters in the book of Isaiah, and in fact the whole book, which gives great clarity to what's going on in our world today. Great clarity. And this is one of them. And we're going to deal with a couple different chapters in Isaiah, and we're going to go to John here in just a moment. But Isaiah 27 verse 9. Therefore, through this, Jacob's iniquity will be forgiven. Jacob's and Israel's iniquity will be forgiven. You cannot put any other nation's name there. It is very specific. It deals only with Israel, Jacob. They're going to make it. The U.S. is given no such promise, no such covenant, no such agreement by God. This will be full price for the pardoning of his sin. When he makes altar stones like pulverized chalk stones, when Asherim and incense altars will not stand. Anything that's pagan, that's raised up by a nation or a culture, and in this case specifically Israel, but it could also apply to Babylon, which some say it is, it's going to be reduced to what we'll say dust, even chalk dust. For the fortified city is isolated, a homestead forlorn, forsaken, like a desert. There the calf will graze, and there it will lie down and feed on its branches. Verse 11, when its limbs are dry, when its branches are dry, when its boughs are dry, they are broken off. Women come and make a fire of them, for they are not a people of discernment. Therefore their Maker will not have compassion on them, and their Creator will not be gracious to them. When the bough breaks, and it does by not being fed from the root, then it's used for fire. Now in the olden days in survival, we called this wood, these boughs, squaw wood. Now you say, oh, that's so un-PC. Okay? It was because it was the easiest wood, these little branches on a tree. There's lots of little dead branches, not big limbs, big boughs, but small ones. And they could go by hand, they didn't need much of an axe or anything, and pick them all off. And so we would teach that. First line of building a fire. Pick off all that little stuff that's hanging, that's dead and dry. And if it's a big limb, we can break that or carve that off too. Because that which is supple, that which is green, we would say, is nourished, doesn't burn very well. In fact, it's shown favor. When the bough breaks, it is consumed. Now Jesus used a similar expression in John 15:6. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. And they gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. Anyone who does not, this is John 15:6. If anyone does not abide or dwell or live in me. And we've already discussed in Christ, Christ follower, in Christ. That's the person. If you're not in Christ, you are a bough to be broken. And when it breaks, and it always does. After this last little wonderful windstorm we had a few weeks ago, you look on the road and everywhere else, and there's all kinds, you just broken limbs all over the road. And you go, where did all them come from? Well, there's obviously somebody out in the woods, clearing the woods, and they're just throwing them out on the road. You say, no, those used to be up there. But because they're dead, they're broken off fairly easily by the wind and thrown to the ground. Therefore, easily accessible to be burned. Christ says, that's the people who do not abide in me. Dwell with me. The branch has no nutrition from the root. It's no longer strong. It's no longer supple. The branch no longer produces fruit. And the bough breaks and falls. Why? Because as it says in Isaiah 27:11, they are not a people of discernment. And your scriptures may have it this way. They are not a people of understanding. They are not a people of wisdom. And when the Bible speaks of this, Solomon talks about it much in the Proverbs and in the wisdom literature. Wisdom. It's not talking about worldly wisdom, figuring out the culture or the time or the way the world does business. That's not what's being talked about. It's not what's being talked about in Isaiah. It is talking about godly wisdom. I guarantee you, and you already know this, you cannot have biblical wisdom and knowledge apart from Christ Jesus and His Word. You cannot. It's not possible. You say, well, I know a lot of 8-pound brain-headed people that, man, they're really brilliant and smart and they know a lot. Yes, they do. In fact, here's a test for you. Ask people as you're in your journey today, 4th of July, hey, recite for me the Pledge of Allegiance. And then say, what does that mean? Now, see, y'all got the cheat notes. What does that mean anyway? Who were the founding fathers? What is the Declaration? See, they're pretty smart out there in the world,
of figuring out how to fill their pockets with money, how to satisfy their own ego and their own pride and their own self-centeredness. You won't have no problem finding those people in your walk this week. None. They're all over. And it's not surprising. And I'm not blaming them. They don't know no better. They have no discernment. They have no biblical wisdom because they've forgotten that years ago. That was Awana. That was Sunday school when I had to go. How many of you were drugged children? Now some of you get this already. I was drugged to Sunday school. I was drugged to church. I was drugged to youth camp. Okay? I was drugged to VBS. Drugged children. Thank you, draggers. Thank you. And if you're a drugged children, you thank those people. I thank God for the teachers that actually teach this and teach our history. We should thank them. And the idea that you should never speak of these things in church, that's stupid. It is. It was never designed that way. And any nation who forgets that their allegiance and their commitment and their dedication to God is tied up in a banner, a flag, and they fail to follow that, they are an avowed enemy of God, hence an avowed enemy of this country. Jeremiah 11:16. Jeremiah 11:16. If you have your finger in Isaiah, just head to the right a little bit. Jeremiah, you remember him? He's the guy that's constantly crying. Weeper. He's got such a soft heart. Not for his own self, for his people, for the nation. He's not dragging out a sword and cutting down every Jew of the nation of Israel and every tribe that rebels against God. If he was to do that, there won't be any of them left. He is soft, weeping, beseeching God on behalf of a nation. The Lord, verse 16, called your name, a green olive tree, beautiful in fruit and form. With the noise of a great tumult, he has kindled a fire on it. Look, and its branches are worthless. Its boughs are worthless. Worthless means, actually, you might have the word broken. Good for nothing. Not useful. Any nation, any person, any family that does not commit their lives to Jesus Christ and follow and serve Him is a loyal patriot of a nation that was founded in Him. The branches are worthless, good for nothing. The branches are dry. The boughs will then fall. Isaiah 17:6, if you would go back there for a moment. Well, to there. We weren't there earlier. I want to show you the thing that keeps us alive today. This is the remnant. This is what kept Israel alive. Isn't it odd that in Isaiah 17:6 it says this, "Yet gleanings will be left in it, like the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 olives on the topmost bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of a fruitful tree, declares the Lord, the God of Israel." Gleanings. If you've been in Brother Mike's study, you know exactly what that word means, what it entails. And it's not just one thing, it's a multitude of things. And so Isaiah is telling the people, God tells Isaiah, tell the people, you know, there's your bough. What's that back in that back corner? Oh, I know, that's an olive. Oh, look, there's two of them. I was so tickled that my tomato plant, I had 6 tomatoes. Now, this is out of 3 plants. Never claimed to be a gardener. Now I'm down to 3. Because the deer, bless their souls, did active pruning for me. But and so I look at the 3. Can't eat them yet. None of them are bigger than a quarter. Is that 2 or 3 faithful that I see back there? 2 or 3. On the most fruitful? Wow, 4 or 5 on the most fruitful branches. That's what saves us. The faithful. The Holy Spirit of God working in your lives as a Christ follower, which brings the Holy Spirit into the country, which brings the Holy Spirit into Congress. 13 colonies, and they all got together and said, yeah. Do you think you could get 50 states to say that today? Or any 13 counties in one state to say that? Unity. Indivisible. What makes them that way? God. Verse 7. In that day, man will have his regard for his Maker. The eyes will look to the Holy One of Israel. Verse 8. And he will not have regard for the altars, the work of his hands, nor will he look to that which his fingers have made, even the Asherim and incense stand. In that day, their strong cities will be forsaken places in the forest, or like branches or boughs, which they abandoned before the sons of Israel, and the land will be a desolation. What happens with people who forget this? Who forget God? They're not promised that they survive. Jacob is, remember, we're not. But even those 4 or 5 on the most fruitful branch, which might mean in the most fruitful cities, not fruitful for the government or anything like that. No. Fruitful for God. That are growing through the root of Christ Jesus and his word. That's how we are sustained, green, supple, growing, producing fruit. If you're not grounded in that root, you are not producing fruit for him or for anyone else for that matter. No matter how successful you may be. And the church should know that. A.T. Barnes says this: national afflictions and judgments often have the effect to turn the eyes of even a wicked and rebellious people to God. They feel their danger. They are convinced of their guilt. They see that no one but God can protect them. And for a time, they are willing, even by humiliation and fasting, to seek divine protection. So if I might paraphrase that, because he's really smart and real articulate, if you got half a brain and you're in distress and affliction as a nation, you know you have to turn to God. That's what he's saying. If you can figure out anything at all, if you know anything at all about devastation and circumstances that are terrible, they are to drive you to God, not away. And that was true with Israel. When they obeyed God, God touched them and blessed them. When they rebelled against God, he turned their face. He wouldn't even answer their prayers. He answered their heart. Not what they said out their mouth. It says in verse 10, verse 9, let me finish that. Desolation. They would become desolate. Do you know how much of the United States is becoming desolate? I mean, stuff, you can't go to like a YouTube and put in drought, just put that word in, and not see how all the major lakes in the West are drying up. Colorado River, drying up. A huge heat wave. Amen. Pleasing for some. You couldn't buy an air conditioner in this town if you tried. Or a fan. You have to order them from somebody that lives in Antarctica. It just seems that way. Great Salt Lake. Just all of the lakes. And you know the cause. Global warming. It's proof, it's evidence. We know the cause. Rebellion to God. Rebellion to God. Disbelief, disobedience to God. They deliberately, intentionally forget. They simply will not remember who they are or where they have come from. If you are, let's say you're an 8th or 9th generation, I'm just throwing that out there as a figure for myself. Where'd you come from? Who are you? And you say, well, where'd you come from? Now, typically today when you ask someone, I asked a few people, where were you from? You from the community? See, we think of state. Some think, well, no, I came from, and you name country, that I came from there. Okay? Some say, no, I'm American. Yeah, American. I like that. Okay? I come from here. By the grace of God. Through feast, through famine. Here's where I am. Why are we able to hold church here today? Why are you able to have a Bible? Because of freedom that was earned by blood. Blood, not yours. Well, not necessarily yours. We have a lot of veterans scattered through here. We have a lot of policemen scattered here. We have some firefighters. Yes. Blood. That's what earned that. To cast that aside, to follow Satan, I think it's probably a bad trade. Just my opinion, but I think God has that same opinion. It says in Isaiah 17, you have forgot, verse 10, you have forgotten the God of your salvation. You have not remembered the rock of your refuge. You have forgotten the God of your salvation. Now, this is applying nationally, right? Because I don't know that there's too many people here that have come to Christ, been baptized in His name, that have forgotten how that happened. Now, we might set it aside to participate in sin, but you don't forget how it happens. The people of the U.S. and many foreign countries choose not to remember the day of their salvation, the day of God's grace. In this country, we have chosen not to remember the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If you have not read those documents, maybe today would be a good day to do so. This week, do so. Perhaps we are living in a time, and indeed, we are blessed with a generation who has forgotten the Lord and all that he has done. This generation is indeed to be a bough that is drying up and about to fall and be broken. People will not remember the real reason for the 4th of July. Because in closing, they make a trade, as I've already introduced. Romans 1, we conclude there. Romans 1. This is verses 18 through 23. You ought to highlight that. I'm going to ask Brother Mike if he would stand up and read that. Read loud.
Romans 1, 18 through 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known of God is evident to them. God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God, or give thanks. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds, and of four-footed animals, and crawling creatures.
Thank you. Y'all see that? Y'all hear that? That is us. That is us. You could put the name of America right there. Save those 2 or 3 olives back there. See, we always call that Sinner's Row. And then those of you in the outer darkness, forgive us. They're laughing, so I know we're okay. But see, that's where the 2 or 3 olives, 4 or 5, that's where they're at, topmost branch. See, y'all thought it was up here. That's what keeps us from falling into a total pit of despair. To celebrate the 4th is to remember the blessings and favor of God and a people who yield to him. This 4th, give thanks. Today, give thanks. And certainly, remember. We're going to participate. I'd like to ask the board if they would come up. We're going to participate in remembering the day of your salvation. And Brother Mike is going to lead us in that this morning.